In this episode, I interviewed David Kohar and discuss his long career in Dynamics. To review the show notes for this episode, please go to nz365guy.com/46. I'd like to thank the generous contribution from our sponsor, the CRM UG. D365 UG, or CRM UG, is the world's most influential user group community of Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM users and partners. Across the globe, members share a common goal of maximizing and advancing the performance of Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM so that individuals and companies can improve operations, overcome obstacles, and exceed goals. Hi everyone, I'm here with David Kohar to discuss Dynamics business impact and the process behind developing winning customer solutions. David has recently started a new position as VP of Business Solutions at eLogic Group, focusing on Microsoft Dynamics 365, social and mobility. David has spent the past 20 years in the CRM industry consulting with organizations on improving and enabling better interactive marketing, sales, and customer service solution. David has been solely focused on Microsoft Dynamics 365 and has been closely involved in all major beta programs and launches. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate you having me on here.
Excellent. So you've been in the industry a long time. You know, anybody over 15 years in Dynamics, that's pretty much since it started. And so it looks like you've been there for that long road. How did you get into it?
Yeah, pretty amazing that I've been in the industry for so long, given that I'm only 30 years old. The interesting start to my journey in CRM, Mark, was actually back in the late 90s with a company called Pivotal Software. You probably remember.
Yep, I remember
them back in the day. And, I had actually probably had one of the best mentors and managers ever in my entire career at Pivotal. And he brought me on board, and he actually wanted me to build out at the time this customer program group within the organization. And we were, in this case, we were the software vendor, so we were on the software side. And so because I was beginning and starting it from scratch, one of the things that I did was I actually interviewed 100 of our customers.
Wow.
And it was a really interesting opportunity to go through and understand how they had become successful using the solution at the time. And again, this is back in the late 90s. And so what was great about that was that as I got more and more engaged with certain set of customers, I really got a sense for sort of how they had applied, of course, this technology to improve a particular business process that was ultimately, improving specific outcome, whether it be increasing sales or driving share of wallet with a customer or whatever have you. And so that's where I really became intrigued with how do we then replicate the sort of things that these really super successful customers were having at the time with other customers, and how could we go and apply this to, in an ideal state to every customer we worked with.
Yeah. So what did you uncover? Because that's quite an interesting process to go through, interviewing 100 customers. What kind of bubbled up, in that research?
Well, actually, the interesting part that bubbled up, there was a couple of dimensions. The first one was that the people that cared and focused more on the outcome and less on the technology always did better. The other thing was that it seemed to be, not in every case, but in many cases, there was an indirect correlation between how good the business outcome was and how hard they had done something technically. So saying that, the other way was some of the most simple technical changes to the solution actually ended up having the largest outcome to the customer.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we especially when you come across many projects that phenomenal amount of money is spent, phenomenal amount of complexity is built into the solution, and what you're saying came out of that is that often the simple things that actually created the most value.
It did, and I know you and I have both been involved in many projects over the years, and with lots of different customer situations. And how often has this happened to you too, where you're working on something and it might be super hard technically, but 12 months later, all of a sudden you're unwinding all that complexity because it was all unnecessary. And in fact, something much more simple was in the end what actually gets adopted, maybe not what necessarily was the most elegant thing that was originally envisioned in a boardroom somewhere 12 months earlier.
So just before we leave the subject of Pivotal, what happened to them at the end of the day? Where are they? Have they become somebody else, or have they become something else? Do they still exist?
They do believe they still are officially a viable platform under CDC. And so that whole era of, if we will think back to Onyx and Pivotal and a few others, Siebel certainly was the big 800-pound CRM gorilla back then. But everybody, of course, got swallowed up ultimately, and in the case of Pivotal, they got purchased by CDC and maybe on just maintenance mode only now. Every once in a while, I don't know if you've run into any companies running Pivotal still, but every once in a while we still run into a customer that has some Pivotal implementation. Usually they're 10 or 15 years old, but
that must be a heck of an old, right? Yeah, because I remember it like in the early days when I started out in Dynamics. I remember having a few Pivotal competes, but it quickly disappeared. And then it's been well over 10 years since I've even come across them again, as in the name or brand or anything like that.
Yeah.
So tell me, just fast forward to Ascentium. And Ascentium, my understanding, had quite a bit of influence over Dynamics back in the day. Is that right? What was your experience there? I see you're there for some 6 odd years. Tell us a bit about that company.
Yeah, terrific run at Ascentium. We had, myself and one of my best friends and colleagues in the industry, Patrick Lewis, started the CRM practice there. Gosh, it was 2004, 2005 timeframe. And we were fortunate enough, actually, we'd grown to a modest size as a CRM practice within a larger IT consulting firm that was doing a lot of different Microsoft technologies at the time. What really grew things for us was we did an acquisition of a firm called Invoke Systems. And the team at Invoke, 3 of them had been the 3 of the original product development team at Microsoft for CRM. So
you're saying at some point that the entire product team was only 3 people.
Well, I'm saying that it was 3 of them.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the team wasn't so big. This was back in the David Thatcher days when he was running it. Remember David, and gosh, maybe there were, I don't want to throw exact number out, but I don't think the team was certainly larger than 20. And so, some big names that are still around today, Jason Hunt, who's over at Avanade now, Shannon Hunt and Aaron Elder, amongst a couple of other big folks from Invoke Systems, Mark Barrett being one of them. They all came over, and we immediately, not only did we grow significantly as a CRM practice, but they had brought over a bunch of street cred, of course, with the product because of the background. We went really deep, actually, around a couple of solutions for the military, believe it or not. Yep. We were doing some very, very big projects for task management using CRM and SharePoint, and that was our claim to fame at the Ascentium.
Microsoft used to pretty much tout them as the main, of the US military using it. Shouldn't everybody? I remember definitely seeing a lot of slide decks, etc., back in the day in reference to those projects. Super. That was some super interesting times too, and so that was a great run. And then Ascentium was effectively 2 businesses back in 2010. One of them was really our CRM business, and one was our interactive business. And we decided to split the 2 companies off, and the CRM business went and was sold over to Avanade. And that's when I made my exit from Ascentium to 0 to 10. Right. So 0 to 10 is a very catchy name, and for those that have been in the industry a while will remember 0 to 10 before it got acquired by Edgewater Full Scope. But 0 to 10, and this is from the Southern Hemisphere point of view, was often held up as kind of like a model Dynamics practice for going after the a large market, not kind of focusing on a couple of big deals a year, but going after multiple deals almost a month in the Dynamics space. Can you tell us a bit about how did that operating model work? I know it's not in place now, to my knowledge, but kind of what was the thinking behind it? How did it work, and why was it successful?
Right. Well, so this was an interesting moment, Mark. I remember this specifically. I joined 0 to 10 back in 2010, and we were at the partner conference, so that would have been about July. And do you remember Connor Marsden?
Yep.
So Connor at the time was running basically the Dynamics CRM online business for the US, and it was at that point an incubation business. And he sat down with Ryan Casey, one of my partners at 0 to 10 and one of the co-founders, and we just had this very transparent conversation with him. He said, "Look, we're trying to incubate this business. We're going to try this concept of doing trials, and frankly, we don't know exactly how it's going to go. It could end up being, the most successful thing ever, or could run right off the rails. But what would you guys want to do as a partner with this trial business?" And, Ryan and I looked at each other, and we looked at Connor, and we said, "Look, we either want literally hundreds and hundreds of those leads, or we don't want any. Actually, we don't know what the right answer is, but give us a couple of days and we'll come back and tell you what our answer is." And so Connor said, "Fair enough." He left that meeting, and Ryan and I just started to build out in our minds, how could you possibly do this in a way that you could run a new business model? Because the usual model of, hey, we're going to talk to one customer at a time and go through the sales process is just going to be, you're just going to run yourself out of business. So we developed this whole program called the Learning Labs program. And there was a number of key people at 0 to 10 that really helped incubate and build this program. I have to call out people like Patrick Lewis again. Paul Colella had a big hand in it. Ryan and I, of course, were kind of the co-creators of this along with Margaret Wise. And so we developed this program where we were really bringing people in multiples and training them through really an onboarding process that we did for the trial, which turned into them becoming customers. And just to give you a stat, this was our best month, but one particular month, I think it was back in June of 2012, I think we landed 56 new customers in a single month.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah, that's interesting because that leads into, and I want to talk a bit more about 0 to 10, but one of the things where, I've interviewed people over the past year, one of the challenges a lot of partners have is executing on if you like, a consistent lead generation strategy that doesn't necessarily involve Microsoft. And I know you guys had a close relationship with Microsoft there, but have you seen any partner or anything you can point to where you see marketing done very well, very consistent, that has a high yield, for the business in the dynamic space?
Yeah, I do have some interesting examples. So I won't call the names out in particular, but I'll kind of talk about the things that I've seen that are interesting, and love to get your perspective on it as well, Mark. But where we have seen companies that have gone really deep vertical and that have really demonstrated some very valuable content that they are sharing with their prospects and their customers, we have heard through the back channels of how well they have done from a lead generation and really an onboarding of their sales process. And the more that I do research on this, and the more I talk to some people that are doing some pretty interesting work in the marketplace. In fact, a gentleman by the name of Mark Stewart does a ton of consulting for a number of Dynamics partners and is a good friend of mine. In fact, we worked together back at Pivotal and had done some fun business impact work with some customers back 20 years ago. And so we connect, still talk about it all the time. And he is pointing me all the time to people that he thinks are doing like some of the best work in the industry. And it is always brought back to super sharp vertical expertise, really great on their content and execution, and the frequency is really high. Interesting. Of those partners, or that, everybody seems to be, there's been a whole consolidation phase again, but, the partners that are more
should I say, generalist or more broader in their consulting focus, definitely seem to struggle with this marketing and execution kind of on that front end they struggle with it as opposed to people, as you say, that have gone vertical, have gone deep.
Yeah. Just a point on that, the thing that I always try to remind, our organization and ourselves of, even as we're approaching new customer opportunities, is that if you're going to go in and tell everybody that you're really, you've got a really great set of people, they're all really super sharp, you've got a super good methodology, these are all things that just are, to guys overuse the word table stakes, but I mean, that if there was 3 partner presentations, everybody's said the exact same thing. So what is it that really sets you apart? And one of the things, without jumping forward to Logic, that really attracted me to Logic was that they really represented some really deep thinking around manufacturing that I was really attracted to. And that's where I knew there was a differentiator. And I keep reminding ourselves, stop talking about the fact that we've got smart people. Of course, we have smart people on our team. And of course, we've got a great implementation methodology. But what's different from us than others that can, bring something unique to the table?
Yeah. So just back on 0 to 10, if you could break down the operating model of the business, what were the kind of the moving parts that kind of brought that together to be successful?
At the time, we were really, a young company and relatively small. And what we felt was our North Star, quite frankly, Mark, just to give context to the story, is that we felt like if we could essentially acquire 2,000 or 3,000 customers, that we would be able to ultimately continue to nurture and find more things to cross-sell and expand our offerings. And so our real job one initially was, how are we going to literally go and acquire this high volume of customers? And one of the things I remember us doing was we were sending out press releases every time we hit the next 250 customer milestone. And I think people were a bit shocked because, they were coming out every 3 or 4 months, or 6 months. They were like, wow, you got 250 more customers than you did 6 months ago. So that was a part of where we were focused. We had this very strong engine that we put in place to onboard and get customers going. Now, this was it was totally counter to how everybody else runs their Dynamics businesses, because we were, of those, for every 250 customers, maybe 50 of them we were actually doing some professional services with in the initial phase, because a lot of them wanted to do a DIY approach, and we'd just give them some educational on the way, but we had acquired the customer and got some incentives, as you well know, from Microsoft around the way to do that. And then we would nurture them along, and they would opt into more programs and different things that we were doing. So that was sort of how we incubated that whole business. And it grew to be a certain size. Really, actually, what ended up us taking the foot off the gas of that whole plan was some of the changes that Microsoft made in their programs. It just became financially not incenting for us to continue to invest at the level we were investing on in the SMB space. And so we started to move up market into the mid-market, which was our big pivot from there. Was we then pivoted towards going after manufacturing customers, and that became our next North Star at 0 to 10.
Yeah. So, I know what you mean by the changes that happened in Microsoft at that time. Excellent. And listen, was there a high degree of training those customers that you're onboarding at that time? And, if you weren't doing the consulting, what were you going to, engaging with them to make them sticky and, stick with, if you like, or adopt the technology?
Yeah. So what was amazing was that we were very stressed at the beginning that we were going to have a lot of, we'll call it snowflakes. So every customer was going to be a little bit different. And it was almost shocking how consistent let's take the example that for every 250 customers, Mark, I would say that 200 plus of them were doing accounts contacts, opportunities, and activities. And so we had that locked down for them very well in terms of getting them thinking through how to do that in a very educational type ways. And we started building out a lot of video content and things that they could consume. And so they actually got a really rich educational experience, especially given it was complimentary, for onboarding that level of type of engagement. Again, SMB market, 5 to 10 users, doing Salesforce, that sort of Salesforce automation, and everything from all the way through from configuration to data migration to how they would onboard and train their teams. And that really got them going. And then we would expand their horizons, of course, with more education around other parts of the platform and things. And some of them would opt into that ultimately. And then some of them would come back, of course, and say, hey, we've tried the DIY part, which is not exactly working out. What would you guys do from a consulting standpoint? And we had some packaged offerings at the time that were all fixed fee that they could opt into to get them onboarded effectively. So that became the plan.
Yeah, excellent. Very interesting. So kind of what stands out as being a, most interesting project across your 20 years that you've consulted on?
Most interesting project. So I would say that one of the most interesting things that I have done, at least of recent, was here at my last role at Full Scope, was we had the opportunity to partner with one of the Caterpillar dealers, and probably one of the more influential Caterpillar dealers in North America. And together we built out what we called our CAD, or equipment dealer solution, at Full Scope. And then we went out and worked with other Caterpillar dealers and complementary dealers using that solution. And it wasn't necessarily one project, but it was one program that we put together. And what I found really interesting about it was that the Caterpillar dealers themselves, because their territories are so well defined, they don't really compete at all with each other. So they're very, very collaborative in how they think about technology and technology investments and working together to make those technology investments even better and better. So there was just so much opportunity to work with these folks that were, number one, sharp people, great people to work with, and just very willing to want to share their own experiences with other dealers and help make the overall solution for everybody better. But that was probably one of the more, certainly of recent, one of the more interesting projects or programs that I've had the opportunity to participate and lead in.
Excellent. So when we think of championing the customer and working with customers, how do you handle, if you like, the politics that can go on inside the customer organization, let alone your own, and kind of chart out a way where, sometimes customers will come to you with ideas that are going to end the project, in trouble. And how do you kind of navigate that territory and, drive for that successful outcome and really delivering something that, is of value to the customer?
Yeah. And of course, everybody for the most part, and certainly there's big customer environments where there's lots of real and perceived politics and such. I'll steer that question towards this, a scenario where people are just trying to honestly do the best thing or what they think is the best thing for their organization. And one of the things that I have felt is, I'll say maybe a little lacking in our industry, and love to get your perspective on this as well. But I kind of feel like we as an industry on the consulting side have been a little bit too quick to acquiesce to the customer's ideas, even if we don't feel they're going to be successful. So one of the things I feel is super important, and certainly something I try to reinforce with my team, which is, remember that they are looking for us to shed our experiences on their project, not just, hey, we know technically how to make this form, configured better than they would, but more of just what has other people done. So I tend to always say to a customer, especially if I feel like they're maybe pushing down an area that's going to be too complex maybe for their users, I will just say to them, just for context, if we were to do the same thing 10 times with 10 different customers, all the other 9 would go the other way, and you guys are going this way. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you deserve to hear kind of what our other 9 customers would do in this case. And oftentimes they'll say, hey, fair enough. This is, we don't want to be that. This is not the moment for us to be special. We want to be like everybody else. And then other times they'll say, hey, this is our moment to be special. We need to dig in here and make this, particular area really different because this is a bit of a unique process or a unique way that we want to do things. And, it's just an honest conversation that everybody gets something out of. And I try to make sure that we're, as an organization, are doing that with our customers because, they deserve that. That's what they should be. Part of what they're paying for is, this isn't your first time doing this. This might only be their first or second time doing it. How do you share that experience with them?
Yeah. No, very good. So what do you do as in, practically, or do you have systems? How do you train new staff, etc., around, customer engagement, creating happy customers? It's one thing for you to personally kind of have a drive and you've got 20 years experience, what works, but like, when new staff are being onboarded or they're in your business and now they're moving more into, a selling type role, that type of thing, how do you make sure that they really keep that customer forefront in their mind and drive value for the customer as well as your business?
Right. And this is the $1 million question in my perspective. So a couple of things is that I want to just touch on here. One is, first and foremost, people have to have good curiosity. And what I mean by that is that I look at every one of these situations and I try to share this with our teams, is have a curiosity for, if you were spending this money yourself, would you actually do this? And why would you do this? Really try to understand the why. And there's some really great techniques that we've all used to go and do this. We run business outcome workshops, or one of the really great things that I love about the work we're doing over at eLogic is, because we've been working with the manufacturing industry for 20 years, and in fact, even more deeply from a micro vertical focus, like industrial equipment manufacturers, and we've got some very, very deep industry expertise. We've actually built out a business value assessment where we will score the customer and do an assessment with them and score them against industry best practices for different business processes. And we'll tell them, like, you're currently what you're doing right now is best in class, or it's almost non-existent against, here's where the industry is at. And they sort of get this color-coded scorecard that they can see very quickly, okay, here's where we need to lean in. And it's all leading towards, let's build something that's going to be of value to the customer, not something that we think is, super cool, technically to do. And so carrying that thread all the way through the project is where it becomes the real art or the real challenge. Because, as you know, Mark, very quickly it can turn to, okay, we're now doing account management today. Let's talk about how we want to configure the account screen and whatnot. And we kind of lose sight for what exactly are we trying to do with our account management strategy, and how are we tiering customers and such, so that we're getting to and we're being repeatable and better with our best customers, and we're efficiently managing our tier 3 customers. And I think if you can first kick off an initiative where you're illuminating the top 3 business outcomes, we'll say, or so, and then you're making sure that you're staying true to those through the project is the silver bullet. And as we all know, it can be challenging to continue threading that through the entire initiative. But that is, I think for us, that's the difference between, hey, we had a great customer success versus we did a great technology implementation.
Yeah. And it'd be very hard for you to kind of run those assessments with the customers if you weren't in a vertical, because you wouldn't have kind of that, broader expertise. So it drives back to that, what we talked about earlier, that, if you go vertical, you go deep vertically, you're going to add a lot of value to your customers just because you have knowledge of how other organizations, in the similar industry run their business.
Yeah, and what it even attracted me to go to eLogic was they had taken it one step further, which was in many cases, we have somebody that sat in that person's chair for 5, 10, 15 years and done their job. And so you know how that voice of experience is, it's even that much more amplified. And so I've really seen some really amazing work that we're able to do with our current customers because we just have that insight in terms of here's the things we know you're probably roadblocked or running into or challenges you're having, and here's some ways we can see through it.
Yeah, really good. Listen, Microsoft have, for the last couple of years had digital transformation as a big part of their go-to-market story. Are you still seeing that in the market now? Is it kind of a story you lead in with, or is it not really relevant to the sector that you're working in?
It is totally relevant. It is definitely one of those, I'll call it phrases that has, as I agree, it's been very popular to talk about digital transformation. I think it's real. I've certainly been talking about it a lot. I feel though like it's something that is easy to talk to a business partner like yourself or an industry person, or talk to somebody over at Microsoft. But when you go and talk to the customer, I think overusing the word digital transformation, I think that's it's not really all the time resonating with them. What's resonating with them, of course, is I'm trying to, as a manufacturer, trying to much more reliably service my customers. And so, we might ultimately get into a conversation around IoT and field service and how that's going to change the way that they can go and monetize and service their customers more effectively. But, they think of it as that's a better way to go and service our customers. They probably weren't as impressed with the digital transformation speak, potentially up front. But that's it's a bit of I find that's just a bit of a game time decision almost with the room and the audience in terms of, do they want to hear about digital transformation or do they want to just talk about their industry?
Yeah, in context of their business. So what about, in the time you've been doing this, you've observed Microsoft and, the way the platform, Dynamics CRM, AX, the whole transition that we've gone over, in the last 10, 15 years. What's your thoughts on it? What do you see as work? What do you see as key turning points, influences, that type of thing?
I have always had a great deal of optimism and passion for this, not just the industry, but I think what Microsoft has been doing. So I've generally been somewhere between an optimist and a realist, depending on which day you get me. I feel, though, that this is a super interesting time. I think we all keep, saying this is the most interesting time we've ever been in, but it does feel that way. I think when James Phillips has really taken over the reins of business applications at Microsoft and has, I believe at least conceptually, and this continues to happen in reality, is really mainstream Dynamics into the business, has surrounded it with this Power Platform and all this related technology that I think is a much stronger benefit to our customers and just a much better delivery mechanism to enable and realize some of these business goals and business value that we've been trying to create for customers. I think it's a very powerful time, and I feel like they've got the street cred within Microsoft to really kind of drive this thing and make it happen. So from that standpoint, I'm very optimistic that we're in one of the best times ever as Microsoft partners, especially around the business application space.
Yeah. It's interesting. If I gave you $1 million to go out and start a practice, and let's make it $2 million, what would you do? What would you do? Where would you start if you decided you're going to take the money and you're going to start today? What would you strategically do, etc., to set up a new business, a new, one that's going to be in, if you like, selling Dynamics?
Well, I would go and get my 5 best friends to do this with me that would all have a combination of deep experience in the industry, and we would essentially all have our complementary set of skills to round out the functional roles within the organization. And Mark, I would absolutely pick a micro vertical that has been underserved by the Dynamics space. And I would go out and land a couple of key customers in that space and work with them to develop a solution, and would drive towards still being systems integrator, but more and more over time, starting to resemble a little bit more of what an ISV would look like, and being a good hybrid of the two. That would be my goal to start a business with $2 million.
Interesting. Have you seen, we've seen a lot of acquisitions or mergers, etc., happening, and now some big companies in the space. Do you think that's going to leave a void that, the boutique consulting practice, can come to the fore, that, people will split off and do their, start the next round of businesses, that we've seen in the past? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have been thinking a little bit about this topic, and there has been an unprecedented over the years here, a number of times where whether it be the middle management have grown within a partner practice and then spun out and become the executives of their own business and grown it. I would be more cautious now than ever of starting that business. Now, granted, I know you just cut me a check for $2 million, so I would want to spend it wisely. But in that environment, I've seen, like, at least recently, I've seen this just be a little bit harder to do. It's that the couple people that go off and start their thing. I think I've experienced, I've personally been involved in a number of these that were relatively smaller startups that we've grown and been successful with, good fortune and luck and some really hard work along the way. I feel like this is not the environment right now to as easily do that as it once was.
Yeah. I wonder if age, has that perception as well. I'd be a lot less inclined to quickly turn around and, like a lot of people ask me, you're going to start another practice? And I'm like, nope.
I know, and I asked you that here just before we got started today. So but yeah, I do think though that we ultimately, in order for Microsoft to continue to succeed in the space, they do need that. They need to nurture this entrepreneurial spirit, and it'll be interesting to see what the next gen does. Yeah,
exactly. I just think that, you create a vacuum, people are going to jump in and fill it, and with all the mergers, I've been through a few mergers and acquisitions, and I have never seen one that's ended up fantastic for the staff at the coalface. As in, in my experience and those that I've talked to, and some of the big ones even that have happened in the US, there's a lot of people that get left behind and feel disenfranchised.
Yeah. You know what, though? I will say I share an almost exact sentiment to this. One of the things, though, that when we got acquired by Edgewater Full Scope, as 0 to 10, the 4 partners, we all got together and we talked quite a bit about how we were going to make this one different. And so this was Paul and Ryan and Adam Spur. Again, in the spirit of things, I always say to people, look, if you're going through an acquisition and on any given day you're hitting 4 or 5 out of 10, consider that an 8 or 9, because these things can be challenging and whatnot to do. However, what I would say is that we actually, I think, really exceeded expectations. And part of it was, certainly I think part of it was our intentions as we went into it. A big, though, kudos and sort of shout out to the Full Scope execs. So Russell Smith and John Skandar, who were the execs and the sponsors of us coming on board there, they very much allowed us to onboard into the organization in a very thoughtful manner. And so there were certain things that I think that we did there that made it pretty good for the employees, and that was certainly a big focus for us.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I just see our time is getting close to the end, and I just want to cover off a few quickfire questions with you, if I might.
Sure.
I usually ask these of most guests on the show. So what books, blogs, or podcasts do you recommend most to people? This doesn't have to be anything about Dynamics or even business, but kind of what would jump to top of mind for you?
Well, two, I'm going to recommend nz365guy.com, of course. I'm going to just give you a quick shout out there. The other one, crmchartguy.com. Ulrich Carlson, we chatted about him a little bit before the show. I think he's doing some really interesting things, and his intent on that blog to help you think about visualizations of Dynamics is really cool.
Yeah, excellent. Great guy. What's your favorite app and why?
I'm sort of an app guy, I suppose, on my iPhone. Seller Tracker for my wine, and but I've actually been really jumping into trying to use the CRM app for Outlook, the new app, and I'm trying to push it as absolutely far as it can possibly go. And the interesting thing is it's doing a lot of things that's really actually from a productivity standpoint are pretty awesome. So I've been pretty infatuated with that one lately.
Awesome. It's a good report on it. Do you have any daily rituals that kind of set you on the right path for a successful day?
I usually get up every day between 5 and 6 in the morning, and because I'm a West Coast guy, I would love the idea to go and work out first to clear my mind, but because the rest of my organization is already at the office typically, I go out and get a really good cup of coffee, usually for where we live, it's either a Starbucks or a Mercury Coffee here out in Woodinville, and then I usually try to hit the day running by 6 a.m. with my first set of calls to make sure I'm getting some real good productivity out of the first 2 or 3 hours of my day.
It's a very early start. What's the best purchase you've made under $100?
A 2013 Cabernet Sauvignon from Paradigm in Napa Valley.
Nice. That's so good. Who do you recommend as a guest for this podcast in the future?
Great question. Let me come back to CRM Chart Guy. I think Ulrich Carlson would be a really interesting guest. I've had a chance to spend a little bit of time with him recently, and he's just recently joined our company, Logic. And just, Mark, I know you know him pretty well, and he's just got a really interesting mind for thinking about Dynamics and how you think about it from a very visual standpoint. And he's been very passionate about this part of the whole space and the technology. And so I think he'd be a super fun guest to have on.
Excellent. I'll get in touch with him for sure. David, it's been great to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to connect with you online, where can they find you?
Please do hit me on LinkedIn, David Kohar, Kohar. It'll be easy to find me there. I'm pretty active on Twitter, but most active on LinkedIn. And please do reach out and connect to me. Love to continue the conversation.
You've been listening to the Dynamics 365 show. Please consider subscribing to the feed on any great podcast player. Your host was Business Applications MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. Please check out my YouTube channel. It's up and going, and every week it gets a new YouTube clip of someone in the Dynamics 365 community. For full show notes, you can go to nz365guy.com/46, and I'll see you next time.